Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National World War II Museum. I'm Pete Crane, and I have the honor of being the Vice President of Education and Access here at the National World War II Museum. Thank you for joining us today for the 83rd anniversary of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, as we remember the 2,459 Americans who tragically lost their lives that day. We also are paying tribute to the entire World War II generation who defended our country and helped secure peace and democracy throughout the world. At this moment, please stand as the Marine Corps Color Guard presents our nation's colors and the Marine Forces Reserve Brass Quintet performs our national anthem. Thank you. Please be seated. In keeping with our tradition, I'd like to now recognize all World War II veterans, home front workers, and Holocaust survivors joining us personally or virtually today online. I'm happy to say that we do have a World War II veteran with us today, Mr. Steve Ellis. Thank you for joining us, Steve. It's an honor to pay tribute to you and your service every day here at your museum. I'd also like to recognize all other veterans or currently serving military and their immediate family members who support their service for their service to our nation today. So if you have ever worn the colors and the uniform of our nation, please stand and be recognized. Thank you. Also, I'd like to recognize and welcome the members of our boards of trustees who are here with us today, including the chairwoman of our board, Suzanne Medier. If you would, please stand away from your seats. Got a couple of board members. Today, we remember the tragic events of December 7th, 1941. Those events thrust our nation into a global conflict and set the stage for arguably the biggest story in human history and the most tragic story in human history. It is a story that we tell every day here at the National World War II Museum. 83 years ago, at this very moment, Japanese aircraft were just reaching their targets on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. The devastating casualties and the shockwaves of fear and anger that their attacks sent throughout the country quickly gave way to unity and strong resolve as Americans of all ages and backgrounds came together over the next 4 years to secure victory and to preserve democracy. The National World War II Museum is dedicated to ensuring that future generations and the public remember the events of Pearl Harbor and how that day impacts the world that we live in today. To remember those brave fallen, I'd like to welcome Commander Nathaniel B. Hodges to the stage. Commander, yeah, come on up. Commander Hodges follows in the footsteps of his grandfathers, both of whom served our nation. Seaman Second Class Thomas Norman Ross, who served in World War II, and Airman First Class Vernon Eugene Hodges, who served in the Korean War. He is going to ring the bell 24 times with each chime signifying 100 of the brave souls who lost their lives in the surprise attack. I'd like to welcome the commander, but please stand now as we listen to the 24 chimes of the bell. Take moments of silence for those brave men and women who were lost, and it will be followed by the playing of taps. Thank you. Please be seated. It's particularly striking to know that each one of those rings represented the lives of more than 100 people that were lost. Thank you, Commander Hodges. Now please join me in welcoming one of our historians from the Jenny Craig Institute for the Study of War and Democracy, Dr. John Curatola, to the stage to help place this historic day in context for those of us 83 years removed from the events on Oahu. Dr. Curatola is the Samuel Zemurray Stone Senior Historian in the Jenny Craig Institute for the Study of War and Democracy. He is a former Marine Corps officer of 22 years and is a veteran of Provide Hope in Somalia, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and the 2005 Indian Ocean tsunami relief effort. He is a PhD graduate from the University of Kansas, and his research focuses on World War II, air power, and the early Cold War period. Dr. Curatola is the author of 2 books, Bigger Bombs for a Brighter Tomorrow, Addressing the Nature of the American Atomic Monopoly, and Autumn of Our Discontent, which assesses the U.S. national security policy development in 1950. And I can also tell you that very soon there will be another book coming out about amphibious landings. So thank you and welcome, John.
Thank you, Pete. I appreciate the introduction. And it is indeed an honor today to be serving in this role on this important event as we commemorate what happened this day some 83 years ago. Today we are here to commemorate the over 2,400 Americans who were killed and the over 1,100 wounded in what President Franklin Roosevelt referred to as a date which will live in infamy. But we should also remember that this salient event not just changed the nature of our country, but began the forging of a completely new world. The reverberations of the Japanese aerial attack on the American fleet at Pearl Harbor still resonate today, some 83 years after the event. We also take this time to think about those Americans who gave their last full measure on that Sunday morning. Men such as Machinist Mate First Class Robert R. Scott aboard USS California, who stood at his station supporting the ship's anti-aircraft efforts aimed at the attacking Japanese aircraft. With his compartment flooding, he refused to evacuate the vessel, stating, "This is my station, and I will stay at it as long as the guns are going." Or Seaman First Class James R. Ward aboard USS Arizona, who also refused to evacuate the ship as it began to capsize. Remaining in one of the ship's turrets, he held the flashlight illuminating the way for his fellow crewmen to abandon the ship while sacrificing his own life. Posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, these men were some of 16 servicemen to receive such recognition for their actions that day. In addition to the numerous acts of selflessness and bravery recorded that day, I have no doubt that many more individual deeds were also worthy of recognition but remain unreported or undocumented. These acts of heroism underscore the gravity of the attack. While we commemorate and honor such individual acts, we should take time to reflect on the raid's implications and its legacy, not only at the time, but during the entire war. Furthermore, we should reflect on how this event remains relevant to our nation well into the 21st century. First, the attack rudely awakened America from its pre-war slumber and thrust it into the violence that became the world's deadliest conflict. Many at that time believed the United States should remain neutral and avoid the emerging overseas conflicts. Safely snuggled between 2 huge moats called the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, many Americans favored what was termed as isolationism. However, others saw war clouds looming on the horizon, envisioning U.S. participation. Even with FDR carefully navigating the domestic and international political waters in the years preceding the attack, many Americans believed we could not avoid the growing wars in both Asia and Europe. Despite having only a cadre military focused on the mission of continental defense, the U.S. would soon find itself in combat overseas. For some Japanese, the conflict with the United States had already begun, with the chrysanthemum throne's establishment of a sphere of influence throughout the Far East. Clashing with the United States' interests in the region, the Japanese Empire expanded under the moniker of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere in occupied areas such as Korea, Manchuria, and parts of China. However, given these Japanese actions in the years preceding, FDR and other national leaders envisioned the forthcoming Pacific War, but remained unsure as to how it would actually begin. On 26 November 1941, the Japanese Kido Butai, or its mobile striking force, launched from the Kuril Islands in Hitakapu Bay, sailed east, avoiding the normal shipping routes and evading detection. Placing itself some 230 miles north of the Hawaiian island of Oahu, it subsequently launched over 350 aircraft from 6 aircraft carriers in a sequenced two-pronged attack. Their primary target was Battleship Row at Pearl Harbor and the vessels in the harbor, while other attacks focused on the surrounding airfields and bases of Wheeler, Hickam, and Kaneohe. As the first wave appeared just before 8 a.m., a second wave arrived nearly 45 minutes later. The entire attack only lasted about 75 minutes, but the result was devastating. With 5 battleships sunk, 4 more damaged, and it adding to the tally was several smaller vessels, along with over 180 aircraft also destroyed. Any talk of isolationism quickly disappeared with the flames and the smoke rising from what was left of the American surface fleet and the accompanying Army and Marine bases. Secondly, and more importantly than forcing America's hand regarding the global conflict, the raid galvanized the nation in a way it had never been before. Revenge and payback through what FDR referred to as the American people's righteous might saw the mobilization of the entire nation, not just militarily, but economically, politically, and socially. The nation was transformed overnight with what 19th century German military philosopher Karl von Clausewitz called enmity. With the attack, the American people sought retribution and revenge under the slogan, "Remember Pearl Harbor." Increasing the danger, Nazi Germany and fascist Italy also declared war on the United States on 11 December, forcing Americans to fight in multiple theaters. Given the national resolve, the mobilization of the United States soon deployed a military capable of power projection across 2 oceans that it thought at one time would isolate itself from the overseas violence. The American people quickly transformed a peacetime economy into the arsenal of democracy. In this, the nation built and transported the sinews of war, not just for our troops, but for the many allied forces also fighting aggression. Moreover, the U.S. had to deploy forces overseas. Given the Axis expansion in Europe, Africa, and Asia, and in using a sports analogy here, the American troops had to fight away games. In this, the Army, Navy, and the Marines had to close with Axis formations firmly entrenched in their occupied or captured or home territories. We had to transport armies across contested oceans, conduct forcible entry operations, and defeat a seasoned enemy in their own backyards. No other nation in the world could do that. None. What often goes overlooked in the historiography of the war is the simultaneity of action across the globe that was a uniquely American capability. Fighting 2 major conflicts across the expanse of the globe was a tall order that only the U.S. could conduct. I would argue further that this capability remains the case today, that in the 21st century, only the U.S. can deploy, engage, and sustain combat and humanitarian operations throughout the world. Thirdly, the raid initiated the preeminence of the United States not just as a major military power, but a superpower. The events of December 7th and the resulting actions saw Americans not only build the world's most powerful air, land, and sea forces, but it catapulted the American economy to new heights. With the mobilization of the nation and the power projection overseas, the war ended not only with a military victory, but saw the nation build a robust economy and infrastructure supported by a population with governmental structures fully intact. By 1946, none of the major participating powers could make such a claim. Given the attack on December 7th, the raid forced the nation to look within itself respond to an existential threat, mobilize its available resources, and defend democracies from authoritarian rule in a way no nation ever could. This was accomplished by a cooperation between industry, academia, the government, the various military branches, and of course, the American people. Not to be too dramatic, but the phoenix that rose from the ashes of Pearl Harbor was much more powerful than anything that had ever preceded it, and it was well beyond our enemies or our critics thought was possible. Finally, in closing, perhaps the biggest legacy of the attack was what it taught us about our nation's resolve and tenacity. In this lesson, we learned that our nation wasn't as divided as our enemies thought, nor was it so self-absorbed to shirk its responsibilities to the world at large. The resulting American response, starting on December 8th, 1941, displayed in full view how we, as a collective people, can come together in the face of challenges and overcome our individual and collective differences. In these efforts, we showed the world that this nation will fight for those ideals and principles we hold so dearly. These same principles were so profoundly framed by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863 after the Battle of Gettysburg by declaring, "The nation of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth." We here today are still challenged to maintain this goal of defending democracies, and the reverberations with Pearl Harbor are still being felt today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Curatola. As we conclude today's ceremony, I'd like to thank each of you for joining us here today to commemorate the 83rd anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. I'd also like to give particular thanks to Dr. Curatola, Commander Hodges, and the Marine Forces Reserve Brass Quintet. Please stay with us and enjoy the Marine Forces Reserve Brass Quintet as they play a few more pieces. And please join us again here next Saturday as we celebrate and watch the 125th playing of the Army-Navy game in this very room. They won't be playing in this very room, but of course it'll be an Army victory anyway. So we look forward to seeing you again soon here at the National World War II Museum. Thank you very much.